Welcome. It is 6 o'clock. I will now call the Affordability Committee meeting to order. This meeting is being held in person and electronically in accordance with the Municipal Act. We have two public meetings that are going to be held this evening. If you're joining the meeting virtually and have not yet registered and wish to speak, please email cityclerks@barrie.ca and staff will email you the information to participate virtually. Tonight's applications were deemed complete under the Planning Act to proceed with a public meeting. The first public meeting is to review an application for a zoning bylaw amendment submitted by Smart Centers on behalf of Barrie Bryn Developments Limited to permit agriculture as a temporary use on lands known municipally as 15 Harvey Road. The second public meeting is to review three applications for city-initiated zoning bylaw amendments for lands known municipally as 50 Worsley Street, 48 Dean Avenue, and 29 and 35 Sperling Drive. Members of committee will be listening to the presentations and comments received during the public meetings, but will not be making comments or debating the items tonight. Committee members will have an opportunity to provide comments when the staff reports are considered by general committee at a later date. Interested persons wishing notification of the staff reports can sign the notification form at the back of the council chambers or by email at cityclerks@barrie.ca. Michelle Banfield, Executive Director of Development Services, would you please confirm that the notifications were conducted in accordance with the Planning Act for tonight's public meetings?
Yes, Chair Nixon, they were.
Thank you. I will now call upon Daniel Brenzia of Smart Centers to provide the presentation concerning the zoning bylaw amendment submitted by Smart Centers on behalf of Barrie Bryn Developments Limited to permit agriculture as a temporary use on lands known municipally as 15 Harvey Road.
Good evening, Chair Nixon, members of the Affordability Committee, and the public. My name is Daniel Branzia, and I'm with Smart Centers. And today I'm here on behalf of Barrie Bryn Developments Limited, which is the applicant of the subject property. I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to present our application for this public meeting today. Our application is for a temporary use bylaw to permit temporary farming on the subject property, which is located at 15 Harvey Road. So on the screen there is an aerial view of the subject property and it's outlined. The subject property is vacant and it is approximately 82 acres in size. It's bound to the north by Harvey Road, to the east by Highway 400, to the west by Thrushwood Drive, and to the south by Bryn Drive. And outlined there on the map, you can also see the city's project to extend Bryn Drive through the property, which is currently underway. For some additional context, the lands are currently vacant and historically they've been farmed. Recently, they've been continuously farmed since 2014 through the passing of subsequent interim use bylaws. More recently, just last year, the lands were farmed for field crops. I'm just going to speak a little bit about our application today. It's to request permission to continue farming on the property. And we would like this permission for an additional period of up to 3 years. And this would be facilitated by granting us a temporary use permission. Again, a temporary use permission that would permit agriculture uses on the property. And from a planning perspective, our application conforms to the temporary use policies under the City of Barrie official plan. Farming the property permits a productive use of the vacant lands at this time, and it keeps the property neat and tidy. It reduces weeds and vegetation overgrowth. It reduces dumping and littering on the property, and it also supports a local farmer by giving them the ability to farm crops. In our perspective, this represents good planning and should be considered by the committee and should be approved. So I would like to thank you all today for taking the time to listen to our presentation. And we would be happy to receive any comments and questions you may have at this time.
Thank you very much. I will now, before we go to comments or questions, I'm going to ask Celeste Kismesri, Senior Planner, to provide an update on the status of the applications, and then we can have questions for either one. Thank you.
I'm gonna move you for a sec. Good evening, Chair Nixon, Mayor Nuttall, and members of Affordability Committee. Further to Mr. Branzi's presentation and the memorandum provided to committee by planning staff, I will provide a brief update on the status of the application. The preliminary land use matters being considered by staff at this time include allowing an interim use on vacant lands while the development application process is ongoing, ensuring the temporary use has no impact on the existing natural features or surrounding land use, and that the proposed use is compatible with the construction activity for the Bryn Drive South extension. In terms of next steps in this process, staff are targeting April for a staff report to be brought forward for general committee's consideration. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions of clarification and to hear from members of the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There were no pre-registrations, I do not believe.
No, there was not.
Are there any members of the public with us tonight that would like to provide comments? If so, please approach the podium and begin by stating your first and last name and address for the record. Do we have any members of the public? Okay. I'm going to ask Ward 7 Councillor Harvey, do you have any questions or clarification?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Nixon. To the presenter, Mr. Branzi. Now, if staff or council were to approve just the farming piece of it, but not the tax break that comes associated with this request, is that something that Smart Centers is interested in?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Harvey. That's something we could consider, but it's not something we can discuss at this time. And it's just particularly because for the purposes of this public meeting, we would just like to focus on the planning matters related to our application. And personally, we believe that what needs to be considered is the planning aspects, the planning policy, the official plan policy, when considering application and the merits of approving our application.
Thank you. And a follow-up to that, how much are you paying property taxes currently under the exemption that you've had since 2014?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Harvey. Again, I don't have that information at this time. I can confirm that when a property is farmed, it does receive a lower tax rate. But the details of how much we've been paying and how much we would pay if it's not farmed, I don't have at this time, because again, we would like to focus on the planning application.
Okay, thank you. Those are my only questions, and I will deal with more of the financial piece that obviously my questions are based around when this does come to general committee. Thank you.
Are there any other members of the Affordability Committee that have questions or comments? Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Nixon. Maybe through you to staff and Mr. Symmetry, apologies if I missed it. So we're at 10 years of temporary or use or exclusion or exemption. We're about to authorize possibly ask for 13 years. At what point do we no longer become a temporary? Seems like it's an ongoing. I don't know if that is relevant, but I put it out there. So thank you.
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Harris. The temporary use bylaw can be granted for up to 3 years, and it really is up to council's discretion for how long that use will go on. We do have many in the city that have carried on for longer than this as well. And I think it really is just to determine on its merits whether or not as an interim use, this temporary purpose can be still accommodated on the subject lands until development proceeds.
Great, thank you.
No. Okay, if anyone has any further written comments, you can submit them to Celeste Cemetery in the Development Services Department at Celeste, CELESTE KITSEMETRY@barrie.ca. We're going to move on to our second public meeting. I will now call upon Michelle Banfield, Executive Director of Development Services, to provide the presentation concerning 3 city-initiated zoning bylaw amendments for 50 Worsley Street, 48 Dean Avenue, and 29 and 35 Sperling Drive.
Thank you very much, Chair Nixon, for the introduction. And I am going to speak tonight about 3 properties, city-initiated zoning amendments on 3 properties, 50 Worsley Street, 48 Dean Avenue, and 29 and 35 Sperling Drive. This is just a little bit of the overview, how I'm going to structure the information. So a little bit about the background, a little bit about the highest and best use study for each of the properties, and what people can expect for the next steps. So as a bit of a background, the federal and provincial governments really have been encouraging municipalities really to look inward for many years now, but certainly in recent years, really looking at our own municipal resources and recognizing the potential that we have to help housing in our municipality. So City of Barrie Council did a motion back in 2013, or 2023, to take a look at 3 properties. So to move forward with it, staff did take a look at having a consultant do highest and best use studies for these 3 properties. And a highest and best use is really a development industry term. It represents a concept plan that's designed with about 4 criteria in mind. This is outlined in the memo that accompanies tonight's presentation and notice. So really it's about, what's a reasonable, probable use of the property that's physically possible, appropriately supported, financially feasible, that's really going to result in the highest value of the property. So that's what we mean by a highest and best use study. And we've done this through the use of a consultant to outline the highest and best use proposal for each of the sites. So at this point, we're here as part of a statutory public meeting process to look at the properties, and ultimately, if council changes the zoning on these properties, the intention is to get these sites ready for future development, have some planning approvals in place so that we can move forward with a site development, increasing housing supply and land availability in the city. So the site overview of each site, so 50 Worsley Street is right next to the downtown public library, and it's 1.58 acres or 0.64 hectares in size. 29 and 35 Sperling Drive is on the west side of the 400, around the St. Vincent Street and Cundles Road East area. It's a little bit bigger, 3.8 acres, 1.4 hectares in size. And 48 Dean is next to our Painswick Public Library branch, around the same size, 1.66 acres or 0.67 hectares. So the land use designations on these properties were redesignated through the city's new official plan. And so the 50 Worsley Street property is designated high density. The 29 and 35 Sperling Drive property is designated the Strategic Employment and Economic District, so SEED is the acronym. And the 48 Dean Avenue is designated as a community hub. The existing zonings of the property, so 50 Worsley Street is zoned C1-2, which is our central area commercial zone. 29 and 35 Sperling Drive are zoned highway industrial. And 48 Dean Avenue is zoned C3, which is our shopping center commercial zone. All three of these areas, all three of these sites have had development proposals, recent development proposals in the area, as I said, in recent years. And these are just a couple of examples of some of the properties with different development proposals in and around these three sites. So as part of the highest and best use studies for each of the properties, concept plans were prepared to really try to articulate what the highest and best unit count, quite frankly, would what that would look like in a built form. So these are just concepts and really are used to, as I said, articulate what the change in zoning really could show as possible for these properties. So for 50 Worsley Street, at this point, the concept plan shows two 33-story towers with a 3-story podium with some retail at grade, yielding approximately 628 units, some retail space, and associated parking spaces. And then these are the site-specific standards that we're talking about this evening, and that would be required if a concept like this came forward to council. I'm not going to go over them because it's pretty technical, but as I said, and this is how we would actually, you'd hear be described this for any sort of private development application as well. So these are some of the site-specific standards proposed for Worsley Street. Now, 29 and 35 Sperling Drive, the concept plan for these properties right now shows 11 and 12-story buildings with as well some non-residential uses yielding approximately 546 units and again, the associated parking spaces. And then these are some of the site-specific standards that would be needed to try to advance a concept plan similar to what's proposed through these studies. For 48 Dean Avenue, the concept plan shows a 10-story building with 4 stories fronting onto Dean, approximately 200 units and associated parking spaces. And then these would be some of the site-specific changes to the zoning that would be used to facilitate a plan, something like the concept plan that was prepared as part of the highest and best use study. So the next steps, it's easiest way to think about this are like 3 separate rezoning applications. Like every rezoning application, staff are here tonight to hear comments from the public and the ward councillors. We do a technical review from our regular commenting agencies. We take all of that feedback and come back to council with a staff recommendation report for council to consider. So the intention is for staff to come back, relatively in a compressed time frame so that council has something in front of them, hopefully before the end of Q1, pending on the comments and what we hear this evening. Jordan Lambie is the planner on the file, the senior urban design planner. His contact information is up there as well. Each of these sites has a presence on our proposed development website under the specific property titles and ward boundaries. So this concludes my presentation for these 3 properties, and I'm happy to answer questions and happy to listen to what members of the community have to say. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Again, I don't think we had any pre-registrations from the public. No. If there are any members of the public here with us tonight who wish to provide comments, please approach the podium and begin by stating your first and last name and address for the record.
Oh, Irene Lowry, 10694 Dean Avenue. Good evening, Mayor Nuttall, Chair Nixon, and councillors. Thank you for this opportunity to speak at our public meeting regarding the proposal to rezone the remaining 1.66 acres at our Painswick Library. During 2011 and 2012, our neighbors worked hard and contributed dollars to have our Painswick Library officially opened on March the 12th, 2012. Our understanding was that the remaining area would be developed as green space with trees, not only to be pleasant for our walkable neighborhood, but also to address some of our changing climate issues. Now you want to rezone that remaining 1.66 acres and sell it to a developer to build housing. Some of us are feeling very betrayed by our city. We agree that there is a need for affordable housing. That is why in that short block on Dean Avenue, from Madeline to Big Bay Point Road, we have the Terraces, an IOOF, not-for-profit, life lease complex with 161 units for the 60-plus population since 2001. And now with a 199-unit apartment building, as well as many single home dwellings. I understand that 300 housing units are allowed on a hectare of land. And as I've just heard, this property could now take 200 units in this proposed 10-story building next to our busy Painswick Library. Our concerns are, who has designed this building? Who will develop it as affordable housing? And who will operate and manage it? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in attendance that would like to speak? Again, please begin by stating your first, last name and address for the record.
My name is Steve Varga. My address is 28 Russell Hill Drive. We are one street back from the Dean Avenue. Thank you for hearing me. I apologize if I'm a little uncomfortable or a little nervous, but basically I just want to speak. I pretty much agree with the comments made by the previous speaker. One thing I would probably say, or at least I would like to believe, the Painswick area, any area obviously goes through planning and they design infrastructure around that and everything like that. So the existing area, Dean, we had heard different things. There would be a parkette, there would be a church, there was different things like that. Those are very, low density items. They wouldn't create a whole lot of, disruption or potential disruption as far as traffic and stuff like that. Not most of us, research would suggest that increase in traffic and stuff like that also potentially causes other issues like accidents, civilian casualties, not casualties, but injuries and stuff like that. Taking a look at the the two buildings, both of them are in a stretch of land that's only about 450 yards long. And with that, it's a single lane each way. They have a bike lane. They do have a left turn lane. However, a left turn lane is great for coming into a property while you're waiting. But when you're coming out with such a high density in that area, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for, accidents, for incidents and stuff like that. My mother lives in the IOF building on the corner. She routinely walks down to the store, as do a lot of the other residents there. There's a school right there. There's a lot of traffic from children and stuff like that on that area. And I'm having a hard time seeing how we can, you know, safely is my concern, have such high density on that area when it was previously designed strictly for very low density residential area. I'm not going to complain about, you know, whether it looks good or this, that, and everything. We need extra housing. We do need affordable housing. There's no doubt about that. However, you know, good intentions cannot excuse poor decisions. I do think having too high of a density on Dean Avenue is a poor decision. The other two properties that we were talking about, they're very close to the highway. I believe they're within a kilometer and a half of access to the highways as well. Most of the roadways have 2 lanes each way, as well as left turn lanes. On Dean, again, we don't have that. I think having that type of density, just potentially we're asking for trouble. I do genuinely believe that. I know even with just the construction of the current building, just having, you know, extra construction traffic, different cars parked on the street. You know, we do know in apartment buildings, there's limited parking. If people have extra cars, where do they put them? They're going to start going on the surrounding streets. It's going to create more traffic on those streets. There's a lot of kids that play on those streets. So we'd like to keep them safe. So that's pretty much what I have to say. You know, and well, actually, sorry, my apologies. Just looking at it from a resident of those buildings, we really don't know what the impact to that area is going to be until that existing building is finished. We fully, you know, fill it up with residents and then see how that impacts the current neighborhood. To have another development start even before that has been filled and we see what type of impact it has to the community, we don't know. We really don't know. So I would hope that the council wouldn't, you know, make any quick or rash decisions, even though they're well-intentioned, and put in another building that is higher capacity than the new one that's going in, and it's on half the space. Along that lines, you know, anytime somebody does have a house, we used to live in an apartment building, my family. We moved into a house because we wanted more room for our children. It's nice to have a safe place for them to play, right? But with these new buildings, the existing one is very high density. It's on less than half the size of what the IOOF building is, but they did allow for a fair amount of green space. All the parking is above ground and underground. It's actually not a bad looking building. My concern still would be, where does everybody go when they want to do something? Step outside for a cigarette, throw a ball with your kids and stuff like that. There are some parks in the area, but now it requires them crossing the road and stuff like that. Again, with the building increased in density, we have more traffic. So now we're going to take the smallest parcel of land, put pretty much just a building. And if you look at the tentative plans for that, it really doesn't allow any room for somebody to do something simple like that. You know, like say somebody wants to get out of their apartment, giving them some place to live is great. But if a family's in there and the kids need to play somewhere, where do they go? As we increase the density, again, I'm beating it to death, but we're increasing the risk of problems on that area. It's a very short area of road. And so if all of a sudden we have kids outside playing this, that, who knows what's going to happen? You know, people coming in and out of those buildings, you know, because it's so congested potentially. More accidents, people could get injured, stuff like that. So those are my concerns. And I'm not certain that property is, you know, best use would be another high density building, especially not before we know what impact the new building that they're currently that's under development has. So, you know, thank you for your time. That's it. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else present in the chamber that would like to speak? Seeing none. I'll start with members of committee then. Do any of you have any comments or questions of clarification? Mayor Nuttall.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to members of the public for the comments regarding Dean Avenue. And I think those comments are heard and certainly will be weighed in terms of what will come from our public servants to council's recommendations. With regards to Dean Avenue and I really want to compare it with some of the things that were actually said with Sperling Drive. And the density that we're seeing at 10 stories on Dean and 11 and 12 stories on Sperling, is there any appetite or has there been any further consideration for higher density on Sperling? Because when I consider those two places and I mean, we've heard traffic and we've heard other things, but when you consider the two places, the housing all around it, there's always going to be more resistance in existing neighborhoods that have bought into an area feeling that this site is slated for X and that's what it's going to be, versus where we don't have a whole bunch of residential neighbors on Sperling. Is there any opportunity to increase the density there and therefore increase the number of units and perhaps impact we're having through this process?
Through Chair Nixon to you, Mayor Nuttall. So I'll just speak a bit globally. So the Sperling site and also the Dean Avenue site are being proposed to be rezoned to the residential apartment zone, the RA2. So in the current zoning bylaw, that zone actually permits up to 45 meters. So that's why you don't actually see a height variation on these applications in the same way you do with Worsley Street. So while the highest and best use for both of those sites are around the 10, 11, 12, the actual zoning bylaw would actually permit probably closer to 15, 16 stories, depending on the floor height and that sort of thing. It's really kind of, so yes, so basically the answer is yes, even with the current proposal to the RA2 zone, could get some additional height, which then could potentially get some additional units and density. It would just have to be kind of looked at again in terms of the what the unit count and the density, how it kind of all fits together, because it's more than just kind of how high and how many units. Is there enough parking? Is there enough setbacks? It's how it all kind of comes together. So these, as I said, these concept plans were really designed just to kind of articulate the highest and best use. But the built form and even some of the unit counts could change if, there's 3-bedroom units versus 1-bedroom units. So I think there is flexibility built in with kind of the way the proposed zoning is set up. But staff can certainly take that back as well to kind of see if there's even kind of more flexibility or more height and density that could be, but there's already some additional height that could actually be accommodated, even with just the regular RA2 zone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Banfield. I guess my follow-up question would be, first of all, is this purely a planning exercise or is there a financial component related to this public meeting today for the city?
So as I said, a highest and best use does definitely have a bit of a financial review to it, but we haven't had these concept plans sent out for like an actual pro forma, I guess, if you will.
Okay. And my request would be, where I don't want to get is where the city liquidates property like Sperling Drive and we end up in a situation with a developer coming back and saying, we don't want it to be 10 to 13 or 15 stories. We want it to be 30 stories. And the City of Barrie sold it based on one set, but I can't see us saying no to that when we've said no to 30 stories and said yes to 30 stories in so many other places. And I feel like we'd maybe leave money on the table and units on the table, quite frankly, for people to live in. So I'm wondering when the report comes back, if we could have some sort of estimation of property value and estimation of per unit, like per door value, so that we can take into consideration the financial implications to the City of Barrie. I know doubling the size of a building doesn't equal double the market value necessarily, But there is some sort of implication there in terms of the value related. And I'd like to have that back with the general committee report with regarding to the planning rationale. And perhaps if I can ask that the valuations come back in a confidential manner, or otherwise, I think that we're telling the market what we're willing to take, rather than it being a process where it depends on the market to come to us.
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Mayor Nuttall, we absolutely could take a look at how we can package that. It would be not necessarily just development services. We've been working with legal on many of these land type matters. So we can absolutely take a look at that. I mean, in terms of, again, the highest and best use, really did look at the existing parameters of the official plan. And so that's an element as well. And obviously, as these things move forward, council's going to have some decisions to make about what they want to see on these properties and who they want to partner with.
Thank you. Any other members of the committee that have comments or questions of clarification? Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thank you. I was exactly thinking the same way of you, Mayor Nuttall. Thank you, Chair Nixon. And again, just in that understanding of the highest and best use and recognizing requests that have come in with similar distances to the highway. So I'm speaking to Sperling and other areas where we're seeing requests come in at 30. So that was, I guess, my question around how do we, reconcile that difference when we're looking at highest and best use when we're seeing a very different, 3 times the height at I know it's not apples and oranges, it's different, but that proximity to the highway, given that some of the description or rationale for why to go so high in those particular locations. So I don't have the question in there. You don't have to answer it. I just kind of like it's my question to the assessment of the highest and best use value.
Through your Chair Nixon, to Councillor Harris, as I said, the real highest and best use piece, like the real piece to it is kind of, what's reasonable, what's kind of legally permitted. There's that kind of element to it that Smart Density would have looked at when they did the highest and best use. And again, there's most likely some flexibility in there, as I said, as it relates to kind of what the height, but even just as an example, like the RA2 does permit up to 15 stories, give or take 16 stories. And through the highest and best use, they still came back with 11 to 12. And that's even with parking restrictions or like parking reductions and, those sorts of things. So there is, like every piece of land, there's limitations to how much you can fit in, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's it for members of committee, but since we're dealing with 3 different properties in different parts of the city, I'm going to open it up to council members in attendance. Does anyone else? Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Chair Nixon. Ms. Banfield, I know the question was asked, but I'm gonna very much make it very clear for anybody that's here from Ward 9. All of the speakers were from Ward 9, and I appreciate you for being here. The current zoning that the land is zoned for, I believe community zoning, that one, and I know it's meters versus stories, but let's simplify it a little bit. I know some floors can be bigger. The current zoning would allow 15 to 16 stories without asking for a variance request specifically for the height component. I understand that once you alter that, you could trigger a parking or different things, but specifically without a height variance, the existing zoning would allow 15 to 16 stories.
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Morales, what I had said was we're looking to change this property from C3, that shopping center commercial, to the RA2, the residential apartment. And the residential apartment zone, that zone, permits, as I said, up to 45 meters, which, as I said, give or take, could be anywhere between 15, 16 stories, depending. The C3 zone, the existing the C3 zone is a lower maximum height because it's shopping center commercial, and you don't typically see tall shopping centers, if you will.
Perfect. And the reason why I asked that is it reminds me, through you, Chair Nixon, and there's a question at the end of this, but it's important in context because this piece of land is related to the building that the deputants alluded to that is going up, that is related to the Painswick Library, that it's related to the evolution of the site. So I remember when the planner of the time, Ray Duhamel, came representing the adjacent lands, it was one of the most clear presentations. He essentially said, yes, there are single detached homes across the road. Here is paperwork and documentation about that when this land essentially got subdivided by Armel in the 1990s, I believe it was 1994. Here's proof that this, while this is not on the intensification corridor, this was designated part of community hub and some of this uses. And here's why we could build up to 15 stories. We're going to propose, they were going to propose 13 at the time. And it just took away the, I guess, pushback from some residents. It frustrated others. I guess my question is there has been at this time, to your understanding, Ms. Banfield, no interest from council to expand the Painswick Library with that land that's been sitting there. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Council Morales, I don't really have anything to offer. I'm not sure if anybody else on staff knows about that, but I haven't.
Okay, and just the reason I asked there is Ms. Lowry went in her deputation, you know, the land has been sitting there for over 12 years now, unfortunately with lots of dirt, and it's been a bit of a nuisance for some residents and definitely wanting to see something else to it. Something I'm noticing, other comments that were asked by the Russell Hill deputant was about the traffic. And adding some color before I say my question, I can definitely agree that on-street parking from other areas on Russell Hill, definitely an issue. I'm not going to dispute that. The speeding though, I don't think that's a Russell Hill thing or even a density in the nearby. I think that's just a global issue. People are driving more aggressively. They have louder cars. It's almost like a social, a failure of our social contract. So I guess my question to you is, before council, if council decides to sell these lands, and I know the answer to this, I just want to make sure the people who took the time to be here feel confident in this. Would the city, in this case, because we are the applicant, would we commission a traffic study to communicate the information that this meets traffic standards, both for traffic flow, times of day, leaving in the morning for work, coming in the evening, and even different times of year?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Council Morales, you know, to further develop these and finally develop these properties, there would be additional studies required to provide some of those details. Again, these are just concept plans, and so potentially the ultimate built form, the ultimate use could very well differ from these concept plans, and then that would require technical review as every other site plan application does in the city.
Specifically with traffic studies, correct?
Specifically traffic and among others. Okay.
And something else I'm looking here, I'm looking at the slide, it's slide 14. I'm noticing that usually people are used to having development applications give less parking spots than are required. For the Dean Avenue, the proposed is actually 28% more than what it would be required under this zoning. Am I interpreting that chart correctly? I don't know, you may not have it in front of you. If IT could put up slide 14.
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Council Morales, you are interpreting that correctly. And really, as I said, it does kind of come from the experience of the consultant and the work that they've done in terms of, you know, what they think is a reasonable, and in cases like this, sometimes it's to accommodate visitor parking and all those sorts of things that wouldn't necessarily. So again, you know, we do, in this case, and for these concept plans, we did rely on the expertise of the consultant to kind of get us to where we are for this. Again, understanding that when the plans become more final, there could be some variations because you're exactly right. We definitely do see in some cases variations to our parking standards.
Sure. And the one more interpretation of that table, if everybody's interested and wants to look at, I don't see a variance request. And again, I know these are preliminary, but I don't see a variance request on amenity space. amenity space can take many forms. You can do a rooftop patio like the terraces has. You can do an outdoor green space like Young Station has. You can do a little space in the back. You can do it in the front. You can even do it internally like a gym, but I don't see an amenity variance because I know that was also brought up by one of the deputants. Is that a correct interpretation that at this time, again, might change, there's no request for an amenity variance?
Through Chair Nixon to Councilor Morales, you are correct. And again, I think it does kind of come back to the consultants really trying to really come up with the highest and best use, which really would also include private amenity space and public amenity space for multi-unit residential buildings.
Okay, perfect. And Ms. Banford, for yourself, I think when this comes back, as Mayor Nuttall was alluding to, through the appropriate ways, I think something that I've been hearing from residents who are not necessarily here is definitely an increased front yard setback. So when we looked at the visual, having the building, and usually I'm a fan of pushing the building to the road, making it more efficient, making sure you get parking in the back, not wasting space. But in this instance, having it as close to as possible to be flush with the location of the Painswick Library is definitely the right thing to do. I've been hearing from residents that they've said activating that frontage. And if at the end of the day we're gonna sell the land and the building's gonna be built to provide more much needed housing of all types and all price points, we definitely can still achieve activating this. So just letting you know, and I'll definitely confirm this as in the form of a question, but an increased front yard setback, ideally targeted at 15 to 17 meters, in order to possibly, and could you do the research if this could possibly that frontage could count towards the amenity space area, which I know we don't always do, and it could become a privately owned public space, which I know is a specific industry acronym of kind of a practice like that. And then finally, this one, I don't want to complicate the file on this land, but in term, again, the deputy made a great point about the more driveways you have on Dean Avenue, the more points of contact that you could create about having this land share a driveway entrance with Painswick Library, essentially where it branches off where the waste room currently is, at least explore the possibility. And if technically it's possible, but there's an impact on the value of the land, something definitely that we would know. So those points that I said, Ms. Banfield, at the appropriate times, that's something that staff can come back and essentially address.
Through you, Chair Nixon to Council Morales. Sure. And I can give you just a couple of thoughts right now. Again, I can't say it enough. It's a concept plan. So certainly kind of, having a bigger front yard setback, that's certainly something that could be considered for sure, regardless of what that land is used for. And the same thing with respect to shared driveways. Again, at some point, should council decide to move forward with this, those would be conversations that you would potentially have with a prospective purchaser, and you'd be able to kind of work with the legal department to make sure the vision aligns with council's vision.
Okay, perfect. And then one final follow-up on this, and there's a question at the end of this. I look at the site that was next door. When they came in at 13. That was a 5-minute meeting with the applicant. I said, you have lots of land, spread it out and have a transition. It's now 4 stories next door, then 6, then 9. So the height going from at its tallest point from 13 to 9, that was a 30% reduction in height as the file evolved. With this one, we're actually proposing at this time to have 28% extra parking in addition to the minimum of what can be done. And also, while the applicant on the adjacent site could have made the 4-story and the 6-story out of wood construction instead of concrete construction because the building code allowed to do it. That's something that at the end of the day, it was made out of concrete. And I know I've heard from residents that they appreciate the better quality build and kind of the vision there. So I guess my question to you is it common to see in complicated, big, and sometimes controversial files like this, is it common for people who may be here for the first time, is it common for a file to evolve and change, whether it's the applicant, a developer that owns the land or the city? Is it common for there to be setback changes, design heights, and access point changes?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Council Morales, absolutely, their files evolve as more technical information comes. Planners are always say to you, what's appropriate on one site isn't necessarily going to be appropriate on other sites. I would even look at this site being different than the Dean Avenue site that's under construction. we have been seeing obviously over time, more dense projects, higher dense projects. There's, elements related to planning trends, living trends, demographic trends, all those sorts of things impact how the project goes from like conception to construction.
Thank you. Councillor Congo.
Thank you, Chair Nixon. And Ms. Banfield, I'll probably just have one or two quick questions, and I appreciate your time in advance consulting with me on some of the things. So being the Ward 3 councillor specific to Sperling being in that ward, I think I'll just say it again, it might be repetitive, but for sake of those, I appreciate the 12 stories. I was surprised it didn't come back higher because it is an opportune area, but totally respect that this is a concept design. And that if you look in Ward 3 further down Cundles, I mean, the largest we're seeing is the Junctions as an example at 6. And I think the most recent approved on Cundles by the North Crossing was maybe an 8, 10, and 12, and 12 is facing the highway. So it does have alignment. So I see where that's nicely aligned, but would be interested to see and what is possible there. I guess for sake of clarity, because I know I'll probably get some questions. I haven't had a lot yet, but because this is a different process, maybe just for sake of being clear, because we are coming forward and the public has access to this visual, it doesn't mean that if someone comes in and purchases that property, they're responsible to build the concept design that we've put forward. That really it's just the zoning that is the parameter they have to bring back concept in. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Kunkel, absolutely. Like a prospective purchaser may have a different vision, and the built form actually at the end of the day might have the same unit count. The buildings might look different, the built form might look different, but it still would all be in the parameters of the zoning. So this, I mean, it's different in the sense that the it's city-owned property, but the rezoning process is dictated by the Planning Act. It's exactly the same. Whether the city owns a property or Bob the builder owns a property, it's exactly the same. You have the notice, the circulation, council considering the bylaw. It's exactly the same.
Okay. And maybe just for the public watching, because I feel like sometimes it's managing expectations. What you see is not necessarily what you're going to get. And sometimes I think that gets lost in the way because we're not all planners and there's a lot of moving parts. So while this is looking at being zoned RA2, and I thank you for identifying that while it identifies up to 12 stories, it could actually permit up to 15 or 16, depending on the built form or such, the details forward. If there was an intention to go higher, what would be the process to which council would be involved in? Would that be a different rezoning? Just so I'm aware of if the public's asking or thinking the maximum ever on this site could be 15 or 16, what is the process by which that zone could perhaps support greater density?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Kungle. So the Sperling property really is limited more by the official plan as well as the zoning. So like any either official plan amendment or a change to the zoning would involve a public process, much like this evening. So
Okay.
the notice, the signs on the property, all those sorts of things.
Thank you. And then last question. While the public, I think some of the key messages have been our intent to sell, and this is part of the process to kind of showcase what's possible and appropriate maybe in those current spaces. How would the public get notified if there was a sale? And then if they're watching developments in their neighborhoods, what's the next step for them to watch overall between us going for sale? And then would we publicly communicate once that confidential process is done? Would that basically just be a waiting period until which a developer comes back with an intention and a site design?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Kungle, I'm going to have to take that away. I'm not exactly sure when things become public. I mean, there's going to be a whole bunch of elements that would be in camera for council to consider, but certainly development applications to say, we rezone it and they come through for a site plan, then again, the site plan application, while not a public process, would be certainly publicly available. And then if there was a zoning change, I'm not 100% sure right off the top of my head about what would be, unless I see Mr. Mills is here, unless he would like to answer that question.
I don't think I have any additional information to offer.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That helps me to kind of appropriately frame any questions I'm getting on this. Thank you.
Councillor Corser.
Thank you, Chair Nixon, and through you, Chair Nixon, to Ms. Banfield. I just have a couple questions, technical questions that I'm not understanding, and I think that if people, our residents are looking online, I'm asking for them too. For example, I'm just on Sperling right now, for example, gross floor area, maximum percentage of lot area, 200%. In math, what's 200% of an area? It's so for max lot area, can you just define that for me, please? Explain it in layman's terms, please.
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Corser. So all of these, I would really direct you to the zoning bylaw. So I mean, I could certainly open up my zoning bylaw and read it to you. I'm not sure if that's what you want, but it really is kind of a defined term in the zoning bylaw. I don't know, Jordan, if you got it at your hands or what have you.
Yeah, just if I could make it maybe a little more simple, it's just like gross floor space. Is that like the size of the lot? And this gross floor space is how close, besides setbacks, this is how big, wide space the building can take in that footprint?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Corser. So really, as I said, gross floor area means the total area of all floors in a building. And I literally, as I said, I'm reading from the zoning bylaw, accepting a basement in a residential building measured from the outside of the exterior walls. This is why, as I said, like the zoning is super, super technical,
Okay.
but exclusive of any building that's used for storage or parking, references, storage, stair walls. So as I said, probably the easiest is if there's really a question about kind of some of these terms for them to reach out to Jordan, and we can kind of direct you to the right section in the zoning bylaw.
Sure. Actually, I think that probably answered my question more than anything, because it's like 600% to 710%. We're not talking about the space of the land and you know, so that makes that question, your answer actually, yeah, kind of deflates my question. For highest best density, we've had these discussions before. We cannot tie a sale of a property to deeply affordable housing. Like, you can't buy this unless you're planning on putting deeply affordable housing here. You can't buy this piece of property unless you're planning on putting multi-generational units or universal design units into that building. We can't actually add the sale of that question. We can't tie, my understanding is we cannot tie those conditions onto the sale of the land. That is a conversation for when site plans come back, correct?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Corser, I wouldn't be the best to advise you on what sort of conditions you could put into an offer of purchase and sale. Again, that would probably be, when the time comes, questions you can point to legal services.
Okay, thank you. And also for just to picking up on something that Councillor Morales mentioned, can you give me an example of what a privately owned public land would be?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Corser. So it's privately owned public space. The acronym is POPs. They're becoming relatively, it's a planning term, I guess, if you will, becoming a little bit more popular as we become more and more dense, and it's really just a matter of having a piece of property that's actually privately owned, operating like a park or a public space. Whereas previously the city would always kind of own the parks, but there'd be easements in place and agreements in place to allow not just the people that maybe live in the building to be able to access these spaces freely.
Thank you. I think that that would be an interesting conversation to come up again, as some of these, well, two of these properties I find that are, culturally, or maybe not culturally, but like our residents, like our community, they're sensitive because they're near, they are very tight to libraries. So to have that third space, which is, you have home, a term that might not be familiar to a lot of residents. You have your home, you have your work, and then you have a third space, a gathering space. And when you're dealing with lands that are very, very close to libraries, which are public spaces, to have that kind of, that consideration for privately owned public spaces, that would be a great conversation to have when some of these plans or some of these proposals come back. Because I think in being next to public lands like public buildings like libraries, to not have that density and crowd, and maybe add a little more third space kind of ideas around it. So that would be good planning, I think, that for that. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, no, Councilor Morales.
Thank you, Chair Nixon. Very quickly, thank you for inspiring a question, Councilor Corser. Residents who are here, residents who are watching, and residents who will watch it later on YouTube, Ms. Banfield, how can they continue being part of the process? What happens to residents a lot, especially the ones that don't follow council? They get this scary piece of paper. There's something concerning there. It's hard to interpret the information. They come here, they hear a lot about like, we'll look into that. And they don't hear about the file for 2 months to a year. Again, those timelines change, but how can residents here who want to continue to be part of the conversation about the POPs, and huge credit to Ms. Lowry. If it wasn't for Ms. Lowry, we wouldn't even be prioritizing this for the Dean Avenue lands. Big kudos again to the Russell Hill resident for putting the traffic thing and the visitor parking. Otherwise, I wouldn't have noticed that we need to ensure that that 30% extra parking, which will likely go to visitors, be prioritized. So how can residents ensure that they can not only be notified for when the meeting comes up, which is probably just sign up for the email list, but they can also, as appropriate, be part of the process where they can give their constructive feedback, whether it be the Dean Avenue file, the Sperling file, or the H block?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councilor Morales. So certainly anybody that's here in public, there's a sign-in sheet at the top that we encourage people to sign. I believe Chair Nixon suggested that. Again, reaching out to the planner on the file is always a great way. And then, if you've given us any sort of written submissions, so even if you don't want to have a written submission, we get emails all the time. Just let me know when this is going back to council. This one in particular is going to be a bit unique. It's going to come back relatively quickly, but in a private development application, sometimes it's years before it comes back. And we work very closely with our clerk's department to make sure that they have their list, planning has our list, and we make sure that people are aware when items are coming back to general committee for recommendations.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. I believe that is it for questions. If anyone has any further written comments, you can submit them. Excuse me, I didn't turn my head that way. Councillor Riedma.
It's okay. I'm used to being ignored. Thank you, Chair Nixon. I just wanted to pick up on something that the mayor started out commenting on, and that is there really are two things going on here. The first one is the land use that we're talking about for the most part. The second one is a financial decision that we as a council have to make. And I wanted to just clarify that and note that I'm sure that when Ms. Banfield comes back with her report, it'll come back with the financial information, and that'll have to be in camera. I have one question on the Sperling site. With respect to that property already has an office building on it. And I'm assuming that it's possible to sell two pieces there. One is the vacant land and the other one is the parcel with the building on it. Is that fair?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Reed, but they do have two municipal addresses, so I would assume they're separate parcels, although I haven't seen a title search. So.
And I'm assuming since we're exempt from the Planning Act, we could just deposit a plan and sever them that way if we wanted to, I suppose. And I guess one of the things that I would be interested in seeing in your financial piece is the property with the building on it now worth, what is it worth? And is it worth more or less than if we knocked it down and rezoned it? So that may be part of the financial piece that we want to look at as well. So if that could be done, that'd be great.
For you, Chair Nixon, to Council Rubio, we'll take notes and we'll provide what we can. And again, it would be Development Services working with our Legal Services Department as they do the real estate transactions.
Sure, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you. If anyone has any further written comments, you can submit them to Jordan Lambie in the Development Services Department at jordan.lambie@barrie.ca. That's JORDAN.Lambie, LAMBIE @barrie.ca. We will move on to reports of advisory committees. There is one advisory committee report to be received, which is the report of the Heritage Barrie Committee dated January 23rd, 2024. Can I have a member of committee put the report on the floor to be received?
Yeah.
Councillor
Nope,
Harris. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Or members of council in attendance? Mayor Nuttall?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment on this. You know, we have not done a good job of highlighting the heritage of this city, both prior to its existence and after its founding. And I think that this is a good step forward in that process. And actually, one of the things that we're working on in my office right now is other opportunities to highlight the city's heritage going forward. And so I know we have two members of the Heritage Committee here this evening. I think this makes a lot of sense. And please pass that back to the Heritage Committee. And I'm going to be putting something on the circulation list asking for more of this type of thing with some specificity around what at this point. But we really do need to build up the narrative around the history of our city and the history prior, and why this was chosen as a location for settlement back in the day. And before that settlement, all of the different Indigenous communities that were here. So just want to say thank you. Please pass the thanks along, and hopefully we see more of this going forward.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Councillor Rima.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall, and for sure we will pass that back. And we're very interested in what you might be working on as well. Maybe if I could just make one little plug here tonight, and that is that stay tuned for March the 6th. Mark that on your calendar. It's our next council meeting, and we're doing the Heritage Awards that night. And so there will be a number of buildings and a number of individuals that are going to be recognized that night for their contribution to heritage. I might also say, warn some of the members of council here that I'm going to be approaching you in the next week or two before the next council meeting to give the award if it's in your ward. So I'll be talking to you about that.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? No? Okay. All in favor? Carried. There is one recommendation from the Heritage Barrie Committee report dated January 23rd, 2024 regarding a 9-mile portage signage. Does a member of committee wish to put this motion on the floor? Mayor Nuttall. As this motion is on the floor, are there any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, are there any questions from members of council in attendance? Seeing none. All in favor? Carried. Okay, do we need a motion for adjournment? No, we do not. Okay, so it is 7:10 PM and we will adjourn the meeting. This concludes the Affordability Committee meeting. Thank you.